System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' inner city left.
This is the Inner City Left broadcast. Today is Sunday, January 4th. I'm Amin TMK alongside Amoja, Lil Tanky, Sumler. Amoja, this is a bit of an emergency broadcast. We would have went on yesterday, but, we don't really get down on Saturdays like that. I just want to start off initially with kind of how are you feeling? I know I, as a leftist, have kind of been a little down on my own heart due to, of course, Maduro's kidnapping by the United States. Just some initial thoughts. How are you doing, man? And it's not really Happy New Year. There's nothing happy about this New Year, but I am wondering how you're doing, my friend.
I mean, so one thing is we need to acknowledge it. Inner City Left. We've been on this, right? We've been telling you about the danger that's imminent. We've been telling you the force that's there is not a big enough force to invade militarily. We've been saying if anything was going to happen, it had to be covert. Because those are not big enough numbers to it's a big enough number to threaten, right? But not to go through with it, And again, all you have to do is look at the military. I mean, just the reality of what military capacity can do and how it affects a population at large, right? So, I just want to get that out of the way. I'm definitely heartbroken to watch once again the country that I live in violate the sovereignty of another nation, right? Under the flimsiest of excuses. But the one thing I will say is it's a mask off moment for anyone that's looking, and the thing that continues to hurt me the most as it relates to this country are the intellectual dynamics, right? The verbal back and forth, my DMs are blown up. I got homies, hit me up. Oh, I got people asking, what about Maduro? So first off, I would say this. Maduro's crime is this: nationalizing the resource of their country and spending those resources on his people. If a person has a problem with that, that tells you a lot about that person. You know what I'm saying? Standard of living has been questionable, but you have to look at the fact that they have been under an embargo from the West for 20 years. In every other way, the health, life expectancy has went up, talking about literacy rates have went up, I mean, the people that are hurt are the people that live in America, the Venezuelans that have no actual blood in the game in Venezuela,
It's like those Cubans in Miami.
Cubans, it's exactly like them. And my question always remains, right? When you want to talk about human rights, you're an expat from Venezuela. And of all the places you could have went to New Zealand, you could have went to, Europe, you could have went to Britain, You went to the United States.
Destroying your country through sanctions, embargoes.
And so their words are off the rip, not really realistic. You came to a country that is one of the greatest human rights violators in the history of humanity. When you look at the eradication of the First Nations that lived here, right? The enslavement of Africans for 200 years that lived here. It's hard for me to believe as an expat, you really care about human rights if the United States is where you landed. And so off the rep, it sounds a lot like, oh my God, I lost my my 10,000 acre plantation under Maduro and Hugo. This man was a bus driver. When was there a bus driver that was the president of the United States of America? Never could such a thing happen, So you already know a lot about those things.
This was a tweet I read earlier. Listen to Venezuelans is not a politic. It is not a way to understand the world because the Venezuelans with the largest platforms in the West are not so coincidentally also white supremacists. Be serious. Have some discipline.
I just got to say, man, see, this is what happens when you start to try to attempt to apply identity politics as a body politic. And that doesn't work, right? Like, that's the politics of individuality. It has almost no bearing in geopolitics and the way that power moves. Power doesn't care about your identity in the ways that liberals put it out there. You know what I'm saying? Like, listen to Venezuelans is fucking patently ridiculous, right? I would say which Venezuelans you listen to. That's a far more important. Are you listening to someone who lives in Caracas, who's been in Caracas for 40 years of their life, their entire life? Or are you listening to someone that was, their parents are Venezuelan, they live in LA, you know what I'm saying? They go and visit Venezuela on Christmas, or you know what I'm saying? Like, Americans in name, and by name, Venezuelans by name only. I think who you listen to has to matter more than like, oh, it's just Venezuelans. The class status of that person is
What about
is
Maduro?
important.
Is he a Venezuelan?
No,
Wasn't he?
he's
Again, if you want to ask about the election, well, how was it rigged? They keep saying it's rigged. How? How do they do it? How does one rig an election? Venezuela is not a small country. It doesn't have a small population. Rigging something like that, and again, their own Supreme Court
has
certified the votes. At what point does again, this is just a regime change. Let's just get into the nitty gritty. I know, again, I'm glad you had that opening. It's important for people to understand, like, we are talking about these things because they are important to the entire world. And we're going to talk about how the world is affected by this. But let's talk about, again, you mentioned it, the mask off moment. I think this is a great point to bring up. This is Donnie J. Pretty much, again, just a mask off moment. Trump says, I'll just play it.
China, Russia, and Iran have interests in Venezuela. How does this operation affect your relationships with them when it comes to the oil and drugs?
And Russia, Russia, when we get things straightened out. But in terms of other countries that want oil, we're in the oil business. We're going to sell it to them. We're not going to say we're not going to. In other words, we'll be selling oil, probably in much larger doses because they couldn't produce very much because their infrastructure was so bad. So we'll be selling large amounts of oil to other countries, many of whom are using it now, but I would say many more will come.
Now, we also, I know you remember this, the first kind of little Trump mask off moment was about Syria. And we're learning more and more about Syria and how that removal of Assad came to be. But he was in there saying, look, we're there for the oil. We're he had that moment. And I think a lot of Americans were jarred by that, even though it's been an obvious policy point for 100 plus years or whatever it is. Just kind of, anyway, you can reaction to that and sort of, again, he mentioned China and Russia. Obviously, they're going to, how is a country like China affected by something like this, in your opinion?
Again, we've talked about this before, right? Venezuela has a very specific kind of petroleum. Most of the petroleum that's on the market is light, sweet crude. That's mostly what like you get from Saudi Arabia and from Iran, from Russia, even the United States, right? They have a heavier crude in Venezuela, and it's used for different industrial capacities, right? So like, it's the best place in the world to get this particular type of oil, and it's a niche product. But again, if you control this, you pretty much control the flow of this niche. As it was, the country that bought 90% of Venezuelan oil was China. So this goes back to Syriana once again, the United States doing everything they can to purposely cut off China's oil supply. Right. This, once again, you have to look at this because this is great game politics. In this way, Venezuela almost doesn't even matter to the United States of America. And this is, again, something that cuts against the language of listen to Venezuelans, because there was nothing that was ever going to change, right, as far as what happened. Either the Americans were going to take over. No, that's just it. The way that they've asserted this refurbished Monroe Doctrine principle, right? the oil had to go to exactly where America wanted at the rates America wanted. Again, we have to say it's mask off because everything else is just it's just not honest. Like talking about drugs in a serious way as it relates to Venezuela is not an honest conversation. Talking about Maduro's governance is not an honest conversation. They didn't get rid of Maduro because he's a bad person. Like Mohammed bin Salman is probably a much worse person, and there's nothing that's going to happen to get rid of him, right? Erdogan in Turkey, a way worse person. Zelensky, a way worse person. Like being a bad person is not why the United States puts you in power or removes you in power. Compliance is what allows you to stay in power. And this is a person that didn't want to loot his country for the aid of the West. And because of that, that makes him a threat. Like not even a national security threat, because we can see how this operation played out. They'd been so deeply compromised. And we'll come back to that too, because there's a lot of fishy things about the way that this operation happened, in and of itself. But to me, I think it's a misnomer you almost, I feel sorry if anyone, right? For the Americans that held their nose and voted for Trump. You were able to overlook racism, sexism, all of the bad things about Trump in this hope that, well, he claims to be anti-war, right? And he's bombed 7 nations already this year. We have Somalia. We have Iran. We have... technically, you should look at Russia with what's happened with those attempts. You have, Syria, Somalia. I mean, it's just such a huge. And Nigeria, right? Just to round out the profile, So when you tricked yourself into believing this thing against all the odds, and in many ways, he feels like the Barack Obama, right? What he did to the anti-war movement in the left is what Trump is doing, right, to the anti-war movement in the right. They're being completely dissuaded away from any type of belief, right, in the electoral system. It's like, well, if Trump is going to do this, they're all, and that's the thing, they're all going to do this. And this is the thing I would say, especially too, for the people that continue to, in their critiques of how Venezuela has played out, the first critique normally is, why didn't China do something? Or why didn't Russia do something? When the reality is that is not the way great game politics work. Right? Again, as an American, you expect Americans to go everywhere they want to. The rest of the world cannot do that. Right? At best, you can hold your own with the Americans in your neighborhood. Russia's able to have the results they're able to have because they're fighting essentially America and their proxies in Ukraine, where their logistics lines are strong. Right? Any conflict that happens with China will happen in the Far East, right? Taiwan, perhaps Japan, perhaps South Korea, perhaps the Philippines, all areas, right, where the logistic capacity of China will never be tested and put. People just think magically, right? Like, oh, the Russians should stop this. Like, how reasonably could you have expected the Russians to stop this? What did you want them to do, right? Because again, it goes back to the ways that identity has corrupted an understanding of how power is maintained in this world. A country's obligation is to their people first, right? And I get as Americans, we don't have any understanding of that because that's not how it works for us. China is concerned with liberating the Chinese people from the yoke of American hegemony. The Russian Federation is worried about freeing the Russian people from the yoke of American and Western hegemony. They're willing to help to the capacity that they can, but never to the point where they put their own survival at risk. And if you think that's chicken-hearted, I don't know what to fucking tell you, because that's a romantic understanding of the way that power works. And I think it incredibly bold, right, from Americans, especially American liberals and baby leftists, because most of you don't even have the courage to vote third party. But you somehow expect these other countries to risk nuclear annihilation by choosing to conflict with the United States militarily, engage with them? Yeah, maybe if you ruled a country, that's what you would do. But that wouldn't be good governance. Like if you risk your people for another people, that's not good governance. It seems to be one of the biggest critiques in American politics right now, right? Why are Americans risking themselves for the Israelis, right? But then you expect the Chinese to do the same thing. The only country that's really doing that in any kind of a major way right now is Iran, who is consistently putting things on the line that damage their ability to grow simply because they continue to support Palestinian resistance around the world in all of the forms that takes. Other than that, there's not a lot of countries that are doing that. Most countries are bowing to the might, rightfully so, by the way, of the West and biding their time, or they're conflicting with the United States in very limited ways. Like China has an economic war with the United States right now, right? The Russian Federation is having a limited engagement. And again, it's important that we remember it's a special military operation because one side has nuclear weapons and the other side does not. Like the Russians don't have to risk a single Russian life. If they wanted to be done with Ukraine, they could easily do so. And reports continue to insist that they're getting closer and closer to, in 2026, unleashing a much greater demonstration of their force, right? Especially after these attempts on Putin's life. But that doesn't include like making emotional, like, again, what do you expect to happen? Like, there are no magic super laser weapons, right? Like, there's no orbital platform where China can just fire on the American fleet in the Caribbean, right? Like, so do you then expect perhaps the Chinese fleet to sail through the Panama Canal and engage the Americans in the Caribbean? Like, how does that make sense, right? So enhance your understanding of logistics, right? Before you begin to critique what war looks like. Because most liberals have not served, most leftists have not served, in any type of capacity. A great deal of liberals don't know anything about martial training at all on any level. Their rhetoric is fiery and strong, but their bodies are weak and fragile. You know what I'm saying? Like, people that are in war, they understand the desperation of this. And war is not like a heroic thing. War is a life or death, end of civilization thing. And it's not something that you engage in lightly.
I think something also is important to acknowledge. China is an economic powerhouse, and they are militarily as well, but they're still in their region a military power. They have one aircraft carrier. I don't know how many America has.
I think they're up to two now.
Oh, I'm sorry, two. Yes, and I think one of them have like drone carriers and things. I'm not saying that they're chopped liver. I'm just saying the United States still has, especially in South America, a real stronghold. Would you say, in your opinion, my friend, that if I bought 85% of your oil, I was supporting you? 85%.
Yeah.
85%. So again, I don't want to get too much into like the leftist community weeds here. But again, I think it's good to remind folks, if you want countries like Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso, and maybe countries one day like Benin or Guinea-Bissau, and the list continues to build and thrive, and they're not going to use the United States as a partner, they have to use somebody else as a partner. There's no just way to build an infrastructure and build all of those things as a country. You need a superpower that you can at least ally with to help you, because not most countries don't have every component that they need to make a modern society. Even China doesn't, and they are as close as you can get to being fully sustainable. And another thing that I think is important to mention is that really, like you mentioned, mask off. Like, let's acknowledge that there are no rules, that rules-based order is whatever we say. And when they started hitting people in the Caribbean, where they were hitting those fishermen and they didn't see any pushback, they said, well, this looks like something that we can just go do. I'm going to just turn a little attention here to Europe because, of course, China, Russia. Maybe shouldn't Europe have something to say?
Why isn't Britain helping? Why isn't France helping?
Because those countries, they understand that they talk about international law far more than the United States does. So Keir Starmer, he was on the BBC doing a little interview. Let's see what he had to say.
An action against a sovereign state that surely flies in the face of international law.
Well, at the moment, it's a fast-moving situation.
We know those facts. President Trump, the White House has said that they captured Maduro and they struck his country. So there's a lot we don't know, but we do know that. So will you condemn that action against a sovereign state?
Well, I want to get all the material facts together, and we simply haven't got the full picture at the moment. It's fast-moving, and we need to piece that together. I can be really clear with you that there was no UK involvement in this operation, and obviously we're working in relation to British citizens and nationals who are there with our embassy. But we need to establish a full picture. I then need to speak to President Trump. I need to speak to our allies. But I don't shy away from this. I've been a lifelong advocate of international law and the importance of compliance with international law. But I want to ensure that I've got all the facts at my disposal, and we haven't got that at the moment. And we need to get that before we come to a decision about the consequences in relation to the actions that have been taken.
And this is not just Keir Starmer. This is all over BBC. This is all over DW or whatever the German is.
Bro. Imagine.
They don't have the facts, man.
Imagine if Putin would have kidnapped Zelensky and his wife, dragged them out of their bed. There would and this is what I'm talking about the hypocrisy of liberals, and all of the baby leftists that have critiques on Maduro. Because there's nothing you can say that can justify this. This is a country that has legitimate ICC and ICJ warrants against Israeli officials. And the president has them there for New Year's. You know what I'm saying? Like, these are binding laws. They bind nations to see this man and arrest him. He has warrants. And the United States says Israel is not subject to the ICC or the ICJ. And yet, we have, in the case of Maduro, the United States charging this man, this sovereign, this head of state of another country with laws under American judicial laws. I mean, this is just a violation on every level of what the international system is supposed to represent. A head of state is supposed to have diplomatic immunity. And everyone knows this. Like, these are the kind of crimes that are decided at the United Nations, if anywhere. And it goes to show you once again just the fakeness of all of this. All of this is a construct, right? The thing that it reminds me the most of is, and by the there were three. I misspoke. There are 3 Chinese aircraft carriers. I forgot that the Fujian is now operational. So not 2, but 3. But it reminds me of in 1519, when the Spanish kidnapped Montezuma II. And they captured him and they forced the Aztecs to fill ships with gold to get him back. And they ruled through him, through his power, and they never gave him back, but they got the gold, right? This is literally that same conquistador spirit. The Americans have went in there into this sovereign country, right, in the dead of night, captured this man and his wife, drugged them out of bed, perp walked him, put handcuffs on him, black bagged him like he was going to go to Guantanamo Bay, which, by the way, is American, right? Let's not talk about human rights when places like Guantanamo Bay still exist. Maduro, the way that he was captured, the way that the aircraft were able to fly low over Caracas, there's something afoot that's not adding up in all of this. Somewhere there were several betrayals. This is not conjecture. This is just the nature of things. Because Venezuela is reported to have had over 5,000 man pads, right? Those are like the bazookas that you use to shoot at flying things. And yet, the low-flying Apaches don't come under fire at all. The air defense is not engaged at all. They're not flying B-2s, stealth bombers. That's not the reported, right, utilization of them. This is pretty traditional military tech. And yet, Saddam Hussein is able to get all of these rounds off. You know what I'm saying? Even the Syrians, before Assad's army was defeated, once again through infiltration, right? And looking at the Syria pattern is what makes me believe a great deal of Maduro's military has been compromised, right? When you look at how long the buildup was there, and it never got to the point whereas like we're starting to see hundreds of thousands of troops, but instead we're just seeing tens of thousands, dozens of thousands of troops. There was bribery that happened at huge. This is almost not even conjecture. People had to be bought off. There are several people that are questionable, but at the end of the day, those things will be made very obvious very shortly. Who gets to stay, right? Because it's striking to me that the same vice president that was on Maduro's ticket is not also abducted, right? The Secretary of Defense is not abducted, right? He's just missing for several hours. And then but also the language of what's happened. Your head of state has been captured, right? I mean, in chess, that ends the game. We capture the king. And yet, the army has not engaged the American assets, right? I mean, if this is not an act of war, I just don't know what is. And all that the Venezuelan government said to the United Nations was, we reserve the right to engage in our sovereign right of national defense. Well, if they captured your president and you're not engaging, then what do you need? What more do you need, right? It seems to me as if significant portions of the Venezuelan government have went over to the Western side and have sold out their people. But again, it's all going to be obvious because these kind of things, they happen very fast. They're very shocking, right? It's like Bush with the mission accomplished moment, right? But counterinsurgency is a tricky thing. And just because you may have bought off some government officials does not mean that you have bought off the people. And by and large, Venezuela is one of the most heavily armed populations in the world. So the thing that's going to be the teller of the tale is going to be 3 months from now, 6 months from now, when the American business executives start to come there, start to go to the oil refineries and the oil, you know what I'm saying? Like to see if counterinsurgency begins. To see if insurgency begins. Other than that, who knows? But I find it very odd that the government has been very docile with the people, calm down, let's find out the facts. They don't sound very different from Ken Starmer. But again, the fact that the Europeans cannot just even openly condemn this act, I mean, it goes to show the vapid hypocrisy of the West. And that's the best possible read. That's the best possible read. The worst possible read is, once again, we don't have to respect brown leaders that don't do what we say. And that's white supremacy. Even come from someone as elegant and refined as Keir Starmer.
This was earlier today. Again, to your point of hypocrisy, I think it's just, I don't know what more people need to see. Maybe we're just reporting on, we're just going to report on this forever. I guess the whole world is talking about this, obviously. And then you have, Donnie J, man. The guy is, like you said, it's just full mask off. Again, there's always going to be these people who are simply mad at him for, being, crude and crass. And obviously is worse than that. He's just, in general, one of the worst people in the world, but also the country and at least in terms of electoral politics is full of people like this. The deep state is full of people like this. So Donald Trump, again, is just another extension of that. But to your point of hypocrisy, and we already reported on this before, The former president, I believe, of Honduras or Nicaragua, we'll find out here, was arrested and charged on drug charges as well. And he was pardoned by Trump. So this is just a reporter asking him about this, and I'll get your thoughts after it plays.
You said that Maduro is responsible for drug trafficking. You recently pardoned the former president of Honduras, who was convicted on many drug trafficking. Can you explain how these two situations are different? And would you ever pardon Maduro?
I endorsed, as you know, the winning president, the man who won in Honduras. I endorsed the man who won in Chile. I endorsed the man who won in Argentina. And we are doing very well with that whole group. What the man that I pardoned was, if you could equate it to us, he was treated like the Biden administration treated a man named Trump. That didn't work out too well for them. This was a man who was persecuted very unfairly. He was the head of the country. He was persecuted very unfairly. And there are a number of them. And we felt that it was a very unfair situation that happened to him. He's also a party member of the man who won. So obviously the people liked what I did. And one of the reasons that was done is because of the fact that the party in power felt very strongly that that man was treated very badly. I studied it very quickly, and then I studied it in great detail. I went to a lot of the people standing behind me, and they felt that that man was persecuted and treated very badly. That's why I gave him a pardon.
Your thoughts, what are your feelings on that?
Man, look at Marco Rubio
so
back there standing behind the right-hand man of Trump.
Yeah,
man, it reminds me a lot of General MacArthur, right? How Asia became his fiefdom after World War II. Up until he was until the Korean War, when he was recalled by the president because he called the president a pussy. This man is afraid to nuke China, pussy. And well, you lost your power there. But until then, he was a bit of the emperor of Asia. Marco Rubio is standing, at the right hand of Trump himself as the emperor of Central Caribbean America and South America. And you start to understand now why he was given Secretary of State. The hypocrisy is just beyond words. This man that they pardoned was a known narco trafficker. I don't like to use the word narco terrorist because I feel like that's just fucking bullshit. Homeboy slang packs. You know what I'm saying? Lots of packs. Hundreds of tons of pack. You know what I'm saying? Hundreds of kilos of pack. Homeboy was one of the biggest drug dealers in the world.
That's bad business, man. We about the money, baby. We're not trying to terrorize. Okay?
And, so again, it's just the whole point of, and even saying the guy that you endorsed, the guy you endorsed in Chile, the Nazi, the literal son of a Nazi that you endorsed. And what's missing is the threat, right? Not only did you endorse these fascists and these Nazis, right? You literally threatened the countries with sanctions if they didn't pick your guy. And you act like that is not somehow voter intimidation, like that's not, election fraud. It is. But hey, so long as it's okay if you sell drugs, and get convicted by the American DEA. It doesn't matter. He's a Republican. He's with the party that likes us. I mean, it's that naked. And once again, right, you don't have the Democrats ever do that. You don't have the Democrats like, well, he's a brown socialist, and I like the social platform. You don't see Mom Donnie saying, well, we have something very close to UBI that's working in Venezuela right now. And, I want to do everything I can just to see, because I'm interested in these platforms to see how they work, applied, towards the population at large. No, everything is reduced to Maduro. Maduro is a bad person. It's all Maduro's fault. And that's, again, liberals are doing this with Trump. Oh, look at what Trump done. Maduro is a bad person and he's a tyrant, but this is inconstitutional. Right?
That was what Nancy Pelosi said. She was like, yeah, of course he's the dictator, narco-terrorist, but we didn't sanction this and we didn't have that. What kind of statement is that? Not to mention, you already mentioned...
they love Trump.
Mob Donnie said that Maduro was a dictator. And, I think we've also heard America, Bernie Sanders here. I just want to, it's Netanyahu is the problem in Israel. You know, that's not the problem. It's not
Trump
the
is not the
leaders.
problem.
He's
The American
symptom.
foreign power. Yeah, right?
He's
Netanyahu is...
Yeah, I mean, he is the orange wart on your face that is caused by another disease that you have. And I get that the wart is ugly, but you have underneath that, you're dying and you're collapsing.
Yeah, I mean, again, just let's play it out. Let's say everything they said was true. Let's say Maduro was a super narco terrorist. Well, you've removed him. So what does any of that have to do with taking Venezuelan oil? Like, you can't even but they're not trying anymore. Like, I think about at least all the effort, right, of the Colin Powell and all of the theatrics at the United Nations and weapons of mass destruction and a vial of anthrax. And they're not even trying anymore. They're doing it because they want to. They're doing it because they feel like they need to. The foreign policy of the United States is the foreign policy. And this is why it's difficult to engage with liberals. You know, oh, this all would have went away if you would have voted for Kamala. No, it fucking wouldn't have. You know, this is what makes Trump so convenient. He gets to do the things that the empire needs done, and he's that bad person, but the empire needed it done, willing to be that person. You know what I'm saying? There's a surefire way you can be sure that Kamala wouldn't have done anything different. And that's, where's her condemnation? Because I've seen Jill Stein's condemnation of this. Where's I've seen the PL Claudia, I've seen her condemnation. I've seen the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum's condemnation. There is no Biden condemnation to be found. There is no Harris condemnation to be found. There is no Obama condemnation to be found. This is what the empire wanted, and they used Trump to do it. And he's just willing to do it. Look, Trump is not an innocent person by any means, but to not acknowledge that he is a vehicle that is being used by the empire, it is naive. And we don't have the time for political naivete anymore.
Yeah, good point. There are so many examples of this type of thing that I just don't know where to end our conversation. There is a lot more to discuss. And obviously this is a breaking news story that everyone is on and everyone is talking about. It is sometimes frustrating, I think, for us who cover this on a daily basis, and so many other people do. So much great knowledge out there by great activists and great academics and intellectuals, and of course the actual resistance fighters. I think it's just disheartening to see. I also just want to mention that 40 Venezuelans were killed, civilians and personnel.
They don't matter.
And they tried to make it seem like it was some surgical strike where no one even, got a hangnail or something, but people were killed in a sovereign nation. And that's what ends up happening to a country like this when you destabilize it. I also want to mention the vice president in Venezuela is very connected to Maduro and connected to the Bolivarian Party. Then also her father was tortured by the CIA. So I am hoping, my hope, again, hope is not a real strategy, but just while we're here, I'm hoping that she and the rest of the government, which seems to be, in control, I guess, to the whatever point that means right now, and we should have known this when Machado was, snuck out of the country and, put on a boat and just sailed out. And Mike Pompeo was also mentioning that, there's protests. And for our podcast listeners, I'm putting the protests in quotes. We know what kind of protest it is in Iran right now. And they're big. It's big news. And, you can tell all the time that we don't have to go too far back to the pagers exploding, that Israel is always afoot and Mossad is always afoot. And there is never a moment, to the point of the Mike Pompeo quote, or at least, I'll paraphrase it here. He was saying, he wants to give his respect to every Iranian out there that's fighting the movement and the Mossad agent next to them. So that again goes to the mask off situation of, what the Endowment for Democracy and the former, USAID and those machinations show up. Your country is infiltrated. And this is why they be and moan about Cuba and sort of the way that they handle their security. And they be and moan about Russia and China and Iran. Well, they are constantly being attempted at least to be infiltrated by the West, whether it's the CIA or MI6 or some other agency, some other alphabet group. And it's acting, again, with impunity in those ways. So when we have this mask-off situation where a leader of a sovereign democratic nation is kidnapped, and his wife, and brought to New York, and then I guess they're being flown to Miami with the perp walk, all of the embarrassing things not only a leader, not only the president, but a huge personality in Venezuela. And, it's just senseless because at the end of the day, narco-terrorism is the new WMD. And if you just say that and you say that, and let's remember, China, all they want to talk about is fentanyl from China. And we know how the Chinese feel about opium and feel about highly addictive drugs. There was the rumor of the Taliban, producing opium from the poppy plant. That has been debunked. We know now that when the Taliban is there is no opium production. The United States is the biggest drug dealer. Ronald Reagan is the biggest drug dealer. And the idea that drugs or whatever it may be is the reason to snatch someone up, any person who believes that for half a second is not an ally, is not on our side. They have to be seen as an enemy. We can't play that stupid two things can be true at once game. That is a silly game that is for video games and songs. You are just
don't do the ops work for free.
You want to fit into this society that is in of itself unethical and immoral. We should all stick out a little bit, the leftists and the socialists and the communists and the people who are pushing back, even the anarchists. Of course, we have a big tent left over here. So for me personally, I want to continue to build with those people, coalition with those people, and the liberals, whatever. Y'all are our enemies right now because Venezuela is a proud and wonderful country, and they voted for Nicolas Maduro, 65%, an election that was earlier.
And nobody has the right to undo that.
No.
Freedom movements have to become within. Let's say, again, the stories are complete bullshit. But again, all of those Venezuelans that feel that way should have moved back to their country, and they should have voted this man out. You in the United States, living your American life, and yet you still, that in and of itself is a very privileged mind state. You don't want to live there and be subjected to the conditions of Venezuela that, by the way, are brought about by the country you've chosen to live in. But you do want to critique the people that are living there. And, it is what
Iranians.
it is, man.
Iranians can also be, you can throw into that some of these Americans, American Iranians, that come here, and it's the same thing, man. There is something called class. And class war exists throughout the world. And it's about being against, of course, there are many aspects to this, but class has to be a major factor in what you're doing. I have solidarity with the poor working class all around the world. And almost all the way around the world, there are multiple steep hierarchies that exist in society. Let's
talk about the identity of impoverished and oppressed. That's the identity I want to acknowledge the most as a poor black dude that grew up in the hood. Before all them other identities, impoverished and oppressed.
Yeah, and you know my life. A lot of people who know my artist life know how drugs is a part of my history, a part of my life. And again, it's something that if you pay any attention to, you pay the Sackler family. It was another CNN report where they mentioned the Sackler family. We've talked about it on some of our older podcasts. The Sackler family who runs the Purdue corporation, not the chicken corporation. It was a different one, the one for Oxycontins. You guys have heard of Oxycontins, the death of maybe 1 million people, 700,000 to the date, and still growing. These people are allowed to settle out of court. They're allowed to live a normal life, giving up none of their, very little percentage of their wealth. They get to do whatever they want. And their model was to get people addicted. And they are not being kidnapped and seized and put in criminal courts. They are, being silently applauded, and their business models being utilized. So the American market is what creates so much of the drug movement in the world and creates the drug kingpins. And again, it just shows the hypocrisy and the lack of, not our listeners. We know our listeners are on it, but you guys are seeing it all around you. It's tough to try to fit into this country because in of itself, to its core, it is inherently violent, imperialist, colonial. And you can look whether it's domestic, what happens to Black people and indigenous people, what happens to poor people, what happens to those people here in America. And you can see how America acts, outside of its country, whether domestic or internationally. In a lot of ways, they are becoming, or if not, have always been a scourge on the planet. And if you want to start anywhere, start with your country. Please stop looking at someone like Maduro and saying, what is the alternative? The alternative is not a person that or a person that thinks like you. That's unfortunate. The alternative to Maduro is a right-wing puppet government. What do we always say about Putin when people are like, get Putin out? Who's going to replace him? You think it's going to be somebody that's more conducive to the West and America? No. Putin is going to be the most conducive to working with the United States.
That you'll ever get again.
Yes. And
out of the Russian Federation.
You've even critiqued that. You've critiqued his willingness to continue to participate with the United States. Grow up, live in a real world. There are political parties. Those parties have power. Those parties have history. And there can't be leaders that come outside of those parties. I'm so sorry. And for so much of elections in the world, it's between two people. A puppet government run by the United States or some form of socialism. And that's just the way it is. And I didn't make it that way. It just is that way. And let's go into 2026 without the silliness of who's good and who's bad and individuals. That's not what we do. That's not what's going to be useful for you. And as we move forward, let's be better. Your reaction, your thoughts. This is a bit of a longer broadcast, but they know this is an emergency, man. This is a big deal.
I mean, my last thought on all of this is for any Americans that are saying, why didn't China help? Why didn't Russia help? I'm going to tell you, you know what I'm saying? Like Raiden told Luke Cage, why didn't you? It's your government that's running roughshod. You're an American. You can do more than Russia or China. Why didn't you save the Venezuelans? And at the end of the day, no one can save anyone other than themselves. Ultimately, it was on Venezuela to save themselves. Now, we don't know if they've been defeated. We know that Hugo Chavez has been taken. I'm sorry, Maduro. You know what I'm saying?
Maduro.
Yeah, Nicolas Maduro.
But the son of Hugo, he reps Hugo very heavily. So the spirit of Hugo is still there.
Still there, right. And the same party.
Right.
We don't like to reduce leaders to countries. That's what we've said. We know that Maduro is taken. We don't know that Venezuela is defeated. But we will find out. Within the next 3 to 6 months, we will definitely find out.
Yeah, man. In these times, I'm glad to have you, man. I'm glad to have people like Kita and sort of our extended family because you feel crazy out here. And I do want to give a shout out to our podcast listeners because we're available everywhere you find podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, many, many more. Fables, Foibles, Other American Sins, available there right behind me. InnerCityLeft.com, link in the description. Me and TMK, Lil Tanky, anywhere you find music. We got some songs coming out this week, y'all. So we're opening up. We have a song called Deep Fake. Myself and Tanky coming out of our project. Alphabet Boys coming out soon. I'm not saying we can predict the future. I'm not Muad'Dib, but I think it's coming at the right time. You're muted, Tanky, but I'm going to give it right back to you. And then I want to give a shout out to our Patreons. We love you guys so much, man. I know I say it every time, but I do mean it. It's a tough economic world out here, and any support is always good. Tanky, anything I missed? Any thoughts, your feelings?
Nah, I'm just saying, man. I mean, like, move through the world the way you move through the world. You got to be a better leftist. You got to be a better human. Whatever that is. However you identify as a human. Right? I think we can mostly agree that, almost everything in the Western law is based around don't take other people's shit. Right? We just went to a country and we took all their shit. I thought we were raised to know that that's bad. That's all I got.
Yeah. Just a correction. You said, I think you said Liu Cage. I think you were caught between Liu Kang and Luke Cage and Johnny Cage. It's all good. I just wanted to we do know our stuff. I didn't want them to unk you on that one.
Wow.
Yeah. Mortal Kombat, original film. It's a guilty pleasure. Maybe still the best video game comic book out there. Video game movie out there.
Man, R.I.P. to Shang Tsung, man. We lost a real one.
We did. Don't let him around. Maybe it's for the better. He can't be around my girl. He's too handsome. No, but R.I.P. to a real one, to Shang Tsung, and he's a legend in the game. And thank you, my friend. Whatever. We'll be back this week to deal with more of the BS. This is how it goes.
Keep your heads up, man.
Yeah. No, it's not over yet. For Amoja, Lil Tanky Summer, I'm Amin TMK. This is the Inner City Left broadcast. Peace.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' Inner City Left.